last 5 years in the dark, as some of you remember. Candlelight service. Before we even came as pastor, I think back in 2014, we had a candlelight service. We had candles all over the place. Good thing the fire marshal wasn't here. He would have closed us down. Thank you. Yes. And then we had one not too long ago. So anyway, we'll hang in there. We'll see what happens. I did want to mention, I knew there was one other thing I wanted to mention by announcements. This coming Wednesday afternoon, we got a lot going on the 21st. Pray for Linda Wood. She has her heart catheterization procedure on the morning of the 21st. The afternoon, from 1 to 5, in the Red Room of the United Way Lakeshore Building on Clay Avenue in Muskegon, is the Recovery Congregation Training for those of you who are interested. Now, we don't have to necessarily be certified as a quote-unquote recovery congregation if we don't wish to, but this is free. It's provided, it's funded by a grant that came to the MCCC. And so if you're interested in that, that's Wednesday afternoon, 1 to 5. I understand that not all of you can be able to make that, especially if you work during the day, but that information is on the FBC family page. I did put that up there a week or two ago, so it should still be there. I put a picture of this form here, so check that out. I know I'm planning to go. I know of at least a couple other folks who are planning to go. If you're available and want to check that out this coming Wednesday at from 1 to 5. All right. So we're getting there. Okay. All right. We're looking at John chapter 8, verses 51 to 59. Now, we can actually kind of get a little bit of speed up down the runway here and go back to verse 48. So if you have your Bible open, you want to look at that. Nice to know that David Gassman is always welcome here, so that's good to know. I was thinking about a situation when I was reading this passage, and the Pharisees were talking to Jesus, and they didn't realize who he was. In fact, they understood who he was claiming to be, but they didn't really understand who he was. In fact, they thought that he was demon-possessed, and it's just one of those things that happens a great deal in the Gospels, especially in the Gospel of John. I don't know if you've ever been in the presence of somebody who was really well-known, famous kind of person, and you didn't realize it. Most of the time, if that happens, you do. I remember one time my wife and I went to Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, and I got a chance to meet and shake hands with a guy named Phil Everly. If you ever heard of the Everly Brothers, okay? Wake Up Little Susie, Dream, 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 okay? All that great stuff. And Don was not there that day. Phil was, and a bunch of his entourage. And I got a chance to meet him, chat with him, shake his hand, got him to autograph our ticket. In fact, I told him, I said, you know, it's really cool that we ran into you because last Christmas when I was in Grand Rapids in a record store, I found that, well, what they had done, they broke up for a while. Groups always seemed, especially related groups, you know, they always seemed to break up for a while. Jimmy and Tommy Dorsey did the same thing. I know that goes back quite a ways. That's secondhand to me. I wasn't alive when they were doing their thing initially. Unlike maybe some of you, but anyway, no, I'm kidding. But I told him, I said, yeah, I said, I found a record. This was a 33. See, for those of you who are younger, they used to have these things called records, you know, okay? And I went into the record store, because that's where you buy records, and I got it was all of their greatest hits, and I bought it for Nancy for Christmas. And I said to Phil Everly, I said, yeah, I said, last Christmas I bought your re-recording of your greatest hits, and I gave it to my wife for Christmas. And he said, oh, he said, we were wondering who bought that record. You know, it was great. I just loved it, okay? But I knew who he was, and my wife just couldn't speak. You know, she just couldn't speak. I mean, that was one of her idols that she loved to listen to. But I was in the presence of someone once who I didn't realize. My son and I were playing golf down in South Bend area. That's where he lives. And we were a twosome, and when you're a twosome, sometimes you get behind a foursome, and through no fault of their own, they can be moving along just fine, but two people typically playing golf move quicker than four people playing golf in a foursome. And so we got to the point where, you know, 4 or 5 holes in, we'd get to the tee box, have to wait for a while. Sometimes the other guys would tee off, or they'd be in the fairway, and we couldn't hit because we'd hit them, you know, kind of thing. Well, we're sitting there waiting, and these two guys in a cart come up behind us. And so the golf etiquette is that if that ever happens, you say to the people, the guys, would you like to team up with us, make a foursome, rather than we wait for them and then you wait for us, and we could just, so sure, okay, we'll do that. So we introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Andy. It's my son Steve. Oh, hi, I'm Ray, and I'm Jim. Okay. So okay, fine. Hi, Ray. Hi, Jim. Ray's my dad's name. Interesting. My brother-in-law's named Jim. Kind of stuff. And so we start playing golf. We get a couple holes down. I start chatting with these guys, and I start chatting with Jim a little bit. And I said, I told him, I teach at Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids. He says, he says, I went to college in Grand Rapids. I said, really? I said, where'd you go? So I went to Calvin. I says, I know Calvin, right down the road from Cornerstone. And we were chatting back and forth. And I said, so are you a pastor or what? He said, no. He says, I teach at the university. Now, we're in South Bend, right? So you know what university that is. Okay? And I started connecting the dots. And I said, Jim, may I ask you, what is your last name? He said, Vanderkam. And I did not realize I was playing golf with Dr. James Vanderkam, Harvard University PhD, professor at Notre Dame, one of the world's leading authorities on the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Old Testament. But I got to tell you this, my golf swing was a lot better than his. It really was. The only solace I can take away from that. No, I didn't realize who he was. And if I had not thought, and he was a great guy. I'm sure he wouldn't have been offended if you don't recognize me, But the fact was, I didn't realize who he was. This is kind of only with Jesus. It's not that they don't know who he is. They know who he claims to be, and they utterly reject him. Right? I was thrilled that I got a chance to chat with Jim for a few holes about various things related to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Old Testament and stuff like that. So that's what happens, and that's kind of what we have here, right? So we want to look at what Scripture says about the person of Christ, and specifically, I want to go to this section in John chapter 8, where Jesus says he is the I am. Now, as I said to you a moment ago, if you look at verse 48 of this chapter, it says, the Jews answered Jesus. Now, he's been having a running conversation. In fact, one of the things that is true about the Gospel of John is there's a lot more conversation between Jesus and his disciples. He has sermons that he gives. In fact, John chapter 14 through John chapter 17 is just a long discourse of Jesus talking to his disciples. If you have a red letter Bible, you might want to just flip the pages through the Gospel of John, and you'll see just how much. John's gospel is less a gospel of action and much more a gospel of words and explanation. And so Jesus has conversations with all kinds of people. He has a conversation with Nicodemus. He has a conversation with the woman at the well. And he has a number of conversations, and he's having one here. And we're sort of coming into the middle of that conversation, beginning in verse 48. When the Jews answered him, aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed? Now, it's hard for us because when we think of Samaritan, we think of the Good Samaritan, right? The irony of that's one of the parables in the Gospel of Luke. It's one of the parables that's only found in the Gospel of Luke. And for us to say Good Samaritan would be sort of like going out today and talking about the good drug dealer. I'm not talking about pharmacist, okay? Or the good pimp, or something like that. You say, well, that's awful. Yeah, exactly. When the Jews said Samaritan, okay, they despised the Samaritans for all kinds of reasons. And so it's not enough to simply say that you are demon-possessed, but you're also demon-possessed and a Samaritan. That's about the worst insult that a Pharisee can give to anybody. It's bad enough that you're demon-possessed, but you're also a Samaritan. Or maybe it's bad enough that you're a Samaritan, but you're also demon-possessed. Jesus says, I am not possessed by a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I am not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Then we're joining the conversation in verse 41. Very truly I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see death. Whoever obeys my word, Jesus says, will never see death. Now, there's some background information we need to know here before we kind of go a little further in this particular passage. One of many things that is unique to the Gospel of John is that Jesus uses what we call the I am. If you look at this little meme here, you can see I am. You can see all these other names in there. And there are 7 equivocations or what we would call in English class predicate nominatives, okay? Jesus says, I am the whatever, all right? The first one is found in chapter 6, and we're not going to look at these. I just want to make these available to you, and you got it on the handout, okay? First of all, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. We've looked at this one already, meaning I am the primary staple of your diet. You should be, you can have all kinds of other things, but you have to have a certain amount of proteins and a certain amount of this and that in order to survive, okay? I am the bread of life. This was the key to any diet in the first century. I am the light of the world. Right? We had a second or so of darkness this morning, and hopefully we won't get any more before we're done. But that's kind of what I'm the light of the world. I am the door. I'm the entrance. You want to get in, you come in through me. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. This is the door to the sheepfold. Okay? This is where the shepherd keeps the sheep and protects them. I am the good shepherd. Okay? Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. This is chapter 11. This is the story of Lazarus. Jesus says to Mary, your brother will rise, your brother will rise again. And she says, I know he will rise again, Lord, at the last day. And he says, I am the resurrection and life. Whoever believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, if you think about that, Lazarus is actually dead at that moment. He has been buried. And yet Jesus says, I am the resurrection and life. Whoever believes in me will never die. So there's something going on here than just the surface meaning. Remember that Jesus in the Gospel of John often speaks on one level, a spiritual level, and those who hear him on a physical level, and it's a different meaning. I am, of course, the way, the truth, and the life. And then the fascinating passage in John 15 where he says, I am the true vine. I am the vine. You are the branches, and he goes on and extends that metaphor. Now, the one that we're going to look at today is not one of these 7 because it is not what we call an equivocation. He doesn't say, I am this. He says, I am. So you have this in John 8 and verse 58, where the issue of Abraham comes up. In verse 57, Jesus says, Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day, and when he saw it, he was glad. And the Pharisees say, you're even 50 years old yet. Nobody said that to me for a long time. Okay? I asked my students, I've told you this before, I asked my students, how old do you think I am? Do you think I look 63? And they say, no. You look a lot older than that, actually, is what they say. Got to watch out for those students, man. They'll get you every time. Okay? You are not yet 50 years old, they said, and you've seen Abraham? Very truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. Now, especially if you're kind of a stickler for English grammar, right? Grammar Nazi. I like what Donna calls me. Donna says you're the grammar king. I just kind of like that. I know. I knew I'd get that reaction. Okay? But I like that better than Nazi. I like it better than grammar Nazi. But before Abraham was, if Jesus had said, before Abraham was, I was, or before Abraham was, I already was, that still implies that he came into existence prior to Abraham, but that he came into existence. And he doesn't say, before Abraham was, I already was. He says, before Abraham was, I am. Now, this, in order to understand, well, let's go back here. In order to understand this text here, you've got to understand the Old Testament backstory. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but it's on the handout. I want to just make you aware of this. Remember that the Old Testament, the New Testament authors take for granted that you know the Old Testament. They just assume that. We're planning on doing, starting in October this fall, I've been lobbied, I've been encouraged, I've been spoken to, and it's all good, okay, to do a more in-depth Bible study on the book of Revelation. So we're going to do that this fall. We're going to start the first Sunday in October, do it at our 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon time, so I'm just going to start publicizing that now, and just talk about the book of Revelation. Okay, 70% of the book of Revelation, 70% of Revelation is allusions to the Old Testament, not quotes. John never says in Revelation, oh, I saw this and it reminded me of what Isaiah wrote about, or it reminded me of what Daniel wrote. He never says that. He just says, I saw this and it looked like this. And you're supposed to go, oh, yeah, I remember reading something like that in the Old Testament. About 70% of the time you're supposed to do that. If you don't do that, now the rest of the New Testament, the authors assume that you know the Old Testament. So let's go back, okay? Remember the story of Moses, right? Moses is born in the beginning of Exodus. Moses dies at the end of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 34, right? In Exodus 3 and 4, the information about Moses' life growing up is very sparse. The first couple chapters, and then all of a sudden here we are, chapter 3. Moses is walking along and he sees a bush that's on fire, but it's never consumed. It just keeps burning and burning and burning and burning, and it never stops, right? So God speaks to Moses in the burning bush, and he says to Moses, I want you to lead my people Israel. I want you to go down to Egypt, I want you to confront Pharaoh, and I want you to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses offers 5 objections to this, 5 reasons why no, okay? The first one, Moses says to God in Exodus 3:11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Now, half of what Moses implies here is good. Yeah. Who are you? You're just a guy, okay? You're just a guy. But I'm going to be with you. It's not going to be just you. I'm going to be with you. So that solves that. Why would you send me? Who am I that I should go? Before Pharaoh? Really? Yeah, well, I'm going to go with you. Right? This is going to be a little like that story about the elephant and the mouse that walked across the drawbridge. And when they got across the drawbridge, the mouse looked up at the elephant and said, boy, we sure made that bridge shake, didn't we? I think they got it. Maybe you can explain it to him after. Yeah, okay. In other words, yeah, Moses is just going to, it's going to be you, but I'm going to be there with you. The presence of God in that sense is remarkable. Remember what happened when the Israelites, we don't want to go into the promised land because it's full of big guys and all that. Okay, all right, then you're all going to die in the wilderness. Oh, no, we'll go. And God says, okay, you can go, but I'm not going to go with you. And they went and they tried. They got a few feet in and they got routed and they got driven away. So then they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years and they all died. Okay? So God says, I will go with you. Objection number 2. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? That sounds like a trick question, doesn't it? Okay, yeah, our God told you to come and do that, huh? Yeah? All right, Mr. Smarty Pants. What's his name? Ooh. Okay. That's like Gibbs rules, right? If you ever watch NCIS, you always interrogate people individually, never together. Want to make sure their stories either match or don't match. Okay? Oh, yeah? You've been talking to our God. Well, he's been talking to me. Okay, all right, well, what's his name? Now, what we'll do, we'll look at that in just a moment because that's the basis of our text today. Objection number 3, Moses said, what if they don't believe me or they don't listen to me and they say, the Lord didn't appear to you? And that's when he gives them the miracles. He says, throw your staff on the ground. And he throws his staff on the ground, it becomes a snake. And God says to Moses, okay, now pick it up by the tail. If you know anything about picking up snakes, there's one thing that you really don't want to do. You never want to pick them up by the tail. You always want to pick them up right here behind the back of their head, right? If you're going to pick them up at all. If there's any chance it's poisonous, I'm gone, okay? But pick it up by the tail, okay? Put your hand in your coat, bring it out. It's leprous, white as snow. Put it back, pull it out. There's some miracles, okay? You want proof? Fine. Okay. Objection number 4. Pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. I can't talk very well. And God says, okay, fine. Then your older brother Aaron, he's on the way. He'll speak for you. And what's interesting is for a while he does, but if you read through the entire book of Deuteronomy, for a guy who is slow of speech and not eloquent, he sure does a pretty good job. He's probably just not being truthful here. He's not being honest, being transparent. Okay? And then the last one he says is this, pardon your servant, this is from the NIV, pardon your servant, Lord, please send somebody else. Now, I love what the King James used to say. The King James could take anything, and make it sound really eloquent and holy, Because in the King James Version, Moses says to God, number 5, he says, Lord, blessed by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Blessed by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. The King James sometimes even makes the devil sound pretty good, with his English and all that sort of stuff. The idea here is, Lord, please send somebody else. This is he's given other objections. This is the real objection. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. Okay? So please send someone else, right? And of course, you know the story that God chastens Moses, and Moses eventually goes. All right, now, let's go back real quickly here to this one right here, okay? If you look at Exodus 3:14, you will see that the statement that is made here is when he says, "What is your name?" And God says, "I am that I am." Or "I am what I am." When you go to the Israelites, you tell them that "I am has sent me unto you." Now, I didn't want to go into a whole lot of detail because I know I wouldn't have time. But basically, the name that is given to God is a four-letter Hebrew word that doesn't even have vowels with it. We don't even know how they pronounced it. It was such a sacred name, they probably didn't pronounce it. But it's very similar to the Hebrew word Hayah, which means "I am," or the one who is. I am the existent one. When God says, "I am that I am," you tell Israel that "I am has sent me unto you." What he's basically saying is he is the eternal one. He is the one who is unlimited. He is the one who provides everything for them that they could possibly need. Now, Jesus, in chapter 8 and verse 58, is going to say, "Before Abraham was, I am." Jesus is doing nothing less than claiming full equality with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Old Testament. God is doing nothing. Imagine if I stood up before you this morning and said to you, "I want you to know that I'm not just Pastor Andy. That's simply the physical form that I've taken on. But I am in truth God himself, and I expect your full devotion and your full worship right now." I think most of you probably wouldn't go along with that. Maybe a couple of you would. No, I don't think any of you would. I think you would have, the mental hospital on speed dial or something. You see, this is the way it is with Jesus. You either accept him for who he says he is, or you just can't accept him at all. This is that statement by C.S. Lewis again. Anyone who says what Jesus has said is either basically on a par with the person who thinks he's a poached egg, or is the kind of person who is just evil. Or he is exactly who he says he is. But you can't walk away and say, well, he's a good guy. Okay? So when Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am," that's what we're getting at. Okay, let's move on here and finish up here with the section we got. All right, what does Jesus do? First of all, Jesus says, whoever obeys his word will never see death. Okay? Now, as Jesus often does in the Gospel of John, he makes a play on words. He is not simply talking about physical death, but about spiritual ultimate death. Whoever believes in me will never ultimately die. The book of Revelation refers to this as the second death. In the story of which I alluded to earlier, the story of Lazarus in John chapter 11. What happens there? Okay? Well, Lazarus has died, and Jesus is told that Lazarus is sick, and he's in Bethany, which is only just a handful of miles from Jerusalem, and Jesus waits. He doesn't go. And then he gets the word that Lazarus, is sleeping. He says to his disciples, "Let's go." And they say, "Well, Lord, if he's sleeping, that's good. He'll get better." And so Jesus has to drop all pretense of subtlety, and he says to his disciples, "Lazarus is dead. But we have to go and wake him up. We have to go and raise him from the dead." And so that's what he does. So that's what he means when he says, in the case of, of Lazarus, that "I am the resurrection and the life." So that's what he means here. He's not talking about physical death, ultimate sense. He's talking about the full aspect of spiritual death. And, of course, the resurrection will bring about an end to that as well. All right? So, then the Pharisees raised the question about Abraham and the prophets, right? So, he says, verse 49, "I'm not possessed by a demon. I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I'm not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly, I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see death." At this they exclaimed, "Now we know that you are demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say that whoever obeys your word will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham?" Yes. Okay. to ask the question. Now, this is the same. I alluded to John 4:12. Okay, that's in the story of the woman at the well, and it's the same sort of thing. That Jesus is there, and he asked the woman for a drink of water, and she says, "So I'm a Samaritan. You're a Jew, and you asked me for water." And Jesus says, "If you knew who it was that was speaking to you, you would ask him, and he would give you living water." Again, play on words there. And she says to him, she said, "What is this living water? What is this water that you're talking about? This is the well that our father Jacob dug. You don't claim to be greater than Jacob, do you?" And of course, Jesus answered that question as yes. So likewise here, do you claim to be? Are you greater than our father Abraham? Yes, he is. Now, you're either going to accept that claim or you're not. Right? Third, Jesus informs the Pharisees of the proper relationship between himself and Abraham. That's in verses 54 to 56. He says, "If I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father, whom you claim is your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him and obey his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad." Right? So Jesus explains to him that Abraham, even though by this time Abraham has been deceased for around 2,000 years. The date, as far as we know, for one educated hypothesis is about 2156 BC. A little over 2,000 years before the birth of Jesus is when Abraham was born. So Abraham's been dead for about 2,000 years, give or take a little bit. Okay? Then fourth, Jesus responds to the Pharisees by telling them, before Abraham was, I am. Not I was, not I became, but I am. Jesus is doing nothing less than claiming equality with God the Father. He himself is nothing less than God himself in human flesh. This is certainly expressed in other places in the other Gospels, but it's almost as though it's more strongly affirmed here in the Gospel of John. We use the term that John has a particularly high Christology, his understanding of who the person of Jesus is. Now, they responded to him by taking up stones with which to kill him, to stone him to death. But he was able to, according to the text, slip away from the temple grounds. That's verse 59. It says, at this they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. I have the Gospel of John movie, and there's an interesting, it's always interesting for a director on a movie, whatever, how do you depict this? And basically, Jesus says this, and then his disciples all rush in, and the Pharisees come forward, and the disciples stand there, and they look around, and he's gone. He's disappeared. This is why Jesus says in the Gospel of John, my hour has not yet come. When his hour comes, but if he hasn't come yet, you're not going to be able to do anything to him. Luke 4 and verse 30. I wish I would have been there to see this. Luke 4:30. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove Jesus out of the town, and took him to the brow of a hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. This is often the way they would stone somebody. They'd push them off a cliff, they'd fall, and the fall would either kill them or severely injure them. They couldn't move, knock them unconscious. Then they would hurl stones on top of them. And then that would do two things. Number one, you never have to come in contact with a dead body, so you're not unclean. Secondly, by the time you're done throwing the stones down, the person's dead and they're buried. You don't have to worry about burying them. Okay? So that's what they're going to do. They're going to lead. They're so upset with what Jesus said, they lead him to the edge of a hill. They plan to shove him off, hurl the stones down on him, and be done with him. But Luke says, in Luke chapter 4 and verse 30, but he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. I would love to have seen that. How did that happen? Did Jesus say, I'm not the prophet you're looking for. You can go about your business. He's not the prophet we're looking for. We can go, I don't know. It's apologies to Star Wars, okay? If you've never seen Star Wars, I'm sorry. I'll explain to you afterwards, okay? I don't know what happened, but my point is that up until the moment, remember what Jesus says, no one takes my life from me? I have the power to lay it down. I have the power to take it up again. Jesus' death who was, Jesus comes before the Pharisees and this, and he goes to Herod Antipas for a while, and then he gets interrogated and all that sort of stuff. But who's really running this? Who's running the interrogation? It's Jesus. I'm only here because I allowed you to keep me here. No one takes my life from me. I have the power to lay it down. I have the power to take it up again. It wasn't time. It was not his hour. Now, the question then that I want to leave us with this morning, John 8:58. Before Abraham was, I am. Now, the question to me that we have to answer is, how are we going to respond to Jesus' claim to be that I am? We know how the Pharisees responded. They thought he was, I don't even want to say they thought he was crazy. They thought he was demonic. They thought he was demon-possessed. They thought he was a Samaritan. They thought he was a liar. They thought he must have been out of his mind or something, because you aren't even 50 years old yet, and Abraham lived 2,000 years ago, and you're saying that Abraham saw you, he saw your day, he observed that? And now you are claiming by saying, before Abraham was, I am, you are claiming full equality with God the Father. Now, folks, we're going to do one of two things with that claim. We're going to either accept it or we're going to reject it. And there's a variety of reasons you could reject it. But you're either going to reject it or you're going to accept it. Now, there's all kinds of ways you can reject it. You can reject it by just saying, you know what, I don't need, I'm good Sunday morning between 10:30 and 11:42 and another minute or two. I'm okay. I don't mind, giving Jesus, There was a program. Remember when TV stations used to come on at like 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and had this test pattern on the screen? Remember that? If you remember that, you're really old, okay? And well, you are. Sorry. But I remember there was a program that used to come on TV, and it started the day, and it was a little devotional program, little sermonette thing. And the one I saw in Grand Rapids, it was called God's 5 Minutes. God gets 5 minutes. I can do that, 5 minutes. Take hours and hours, days, whatever to do it, but I can give God 5 minutes. No, you can't give God, you give God everything. Jesus said, I am. Now, you're either going to accept it. That doesn't mean you don't have a life and family and relationships and hobbies, things that you enjoy, all that sort of stuff. But all those things are taken up in the context of knowing Jesus as the I am. If you don't know him as the I am, then you don't really understand who he is. If he's just a good moral teacher, if he's just a person who said some wise things, okay? Jesus in the Gospel of John, he gets into it. He and the Pharisees and some others, they go at it, mano y mano, okay, in terms of the back and forth. Some of the things Jesus says in the Gospel of John, some of the things we read this morning, people might say, well, that's not very Christ-like. Who just said it? Okay. How do you respond? How do I respond? When Jesus tells us of his complete omnipotent power, his divine nature, and his all-sufficiency, how do you and I respond when Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am? Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the message that Christ has given us. Thank you for what he says, and thank you for who he is. I pray your blessing